Okay, it's recording now.
All right, so we'll get ready. We'll get going in a minute or two as other members join.
Hey, Trevor.
Hi, good morning.
It looks like Matt is having a little trouble joining, Mary.
Yeah, as soon as we get him in, then we'll get started.
Morning, Gary.
Good morning.
I think Matt's in now.
All right, I'll call the meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee for January 26th to order. For this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by the video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use the full name or acts inappropriately. Also a note, we do not have the raise hand feature, but we do have the chat feature. So any member of the public who wishes to join can send a chat to me, Mary Longacre, the chair, and I will recognize you when it's appropriate. Also, if you do not have video and are not able to communicate by chat, if there is a moment, you can also unmute yourself and request to speak. To get started, I'll confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Peter Brace.
Aye.
Graham Durovich.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
I don't see Ian Golding at the moment. Jen Carberg.
Here.
Fritz McClure.
Here.
And Chair Mary Longacre. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Here.
Holly Backus.
Present.
And we have somebody identified as Steve. Would you please put your full name in your Zoom window so that we know who you are? Anticipated speakers on the agenda, Trevor Johnson.
Present.
And Trevor, do you have anybody else speaking today from your team?
No, it'll just be me.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. The open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you will find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberation of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. Time permitting, this meeting will feature public comment. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other people may be able to see you and take care not to share your screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Before we move to the first item on the agenda, I will cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair may go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. And please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after the members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Additionally, members of the public can submit comments by email, either in advance or potentially, I'm not going to say during the meeting because email is a little bit iffy right now for Vince, but certainly in advance or after the meeting to vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov. And finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Thank you. I think we have one change to the agenda, and that is that item 7, the brochure is not available at the moment and has not been distributed to members in advance of the meeting, so we will not be addressing that on this agenda unless anyone has a comment on that. So we will strike that from the agenda. So the first item on our agenda, Vince, if you would go ahead and put up the flyer. The Coastal Resilience Plan Virtual Open House, January 28th, that's this Thursday at 5:30, is available to the public via Zoom. There is a QR code if you're able to take a shot of that with your mobile device. Also, this is linked on the town's website, probably the easiest way to find it. So go to nantucket-ma.gov on the government tab, click on projects and look for the community resilience projects and then the coastal resilience plan. There is an RSVP link on that site for this event. We encourage members of the public to join us as Arcadis will be requesting public input and providing opportunities for small group participation at this event. Trevor, is there anything you want to add about the event Thursday night for the public while we're on this subject?
No, just we're expecting a great turnout already, so very encouraged to see the amount of RSVPs that we have, and looking forward to a great meeting.
Thank you. And just a reminder, we want all different opinions, you know, whether you're a longtime islander or a wash ashore or a seasonal resident or a business owner or a worker. You know, all opinions are welcome to join us at this event. This is not for environmentalists only or year-round residents only.
Mary, can I make one additional comment?
Yes.
The only thing I would note is that if people are planning to attend, if they could just RSVP so we can make sure to have a good read on how many to expect. The Zoom link has been shared out to those who have RSVP'd, and we'd prefer that the Zoom link not be shared via email, but people RSVP so that they can receive the specific Zoom link to their email.
Thank you, Trevor. Also note that there is an email list for updates on the Coastal Resilience Plan development process, and that is also on the Coastal Resilience Plans project website on the town's website. So you can sign up for additional information going forward. Okay, Vince, if you can stop the screen share, thank you. We have several other event announcements related to coastal resilience, and we'll take a quick head count for some of these so that Vince will know whether or not we need to post an agenda for a committee meeting. The first is actually not an event in attendance. It's a survey which has been extended through the end of the month from the Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge, which is sponsored by Remain in partnership with Acclimate and several other organizations. They are asking questions around the topic of how do you envision learning to live with water? That survey is been shared on social media. We have a link to it in our agenda so that you can take that, you know, welcoming all responses to that survey as well. We also have a note from the Nantucket Civic League. They will be conducting a forum February 6th, Managing Water as sea levels rise. Vince Murphy will be one of the presenters talking about the Coastal Resilience Plan. Details are posted on the nantucketcivicleague.com website. And again, there is a link in our agenda for that. And then third, just an advance note on the Resilient Nantucket Designs for Adaptation. They will present the Resilience Toolkit in the public forum on April 23rd and 24th. The registration is not yet open unless I'm mistaken. Holly, do you want to add something to that?
I do. So there's
Okay.
actually going to be 2 events prior to that with the HDC. The HDC has 2 dates in both February and March. February is when the draft design guidelines are going to come out. So this is just a regular HDC meeting, but of course it's open to the public. And then the final design guideline review is going to be March. So that's February 12th and March 12th. Again, those links are all on the HDC's website. I can provide that to this body so you have them in advance. Typically the HDC links don't change since they're a regulatory board, but I can provide that to you. That's going to be prior to this final presentation, which you're referencing, which is actually going to be pretty big. It's going to have a lot of different players involved. This is basically our final showcase resilience planning and cultural resource protection efforts in both Europe and the United States. And it will serve as a best practices for adapting historic communities to the impacts of our world's changing climate. So it's going to be pretty good. And we'll get more information out to you as that evolves.
Great. Thank you, Holly. So yeah, if you can send those links, we'll include them in our next agenda so that they're available that way as well. And just a note that Acclimate maintains an event calendar on their website, acclimate.org. Again, we have a link in our agenda to that. And that is hopefully a central place where people can go to find out when and where these events are taking place. Encourage you to follow that. So for the Civic Leagues Forum on February 6th, can we get a show of hands from the members or people who are planning to attend that, Managing Water as Sea Levels Rise? I will be attending. Fritz, any other members planning to attend? That is a Saturday afternoon. Matt, great. Okay, so Vince, it looks like 3, so we probably don't need to post that as a meeting. And I'm going to assume that the HDC meetings February 12th and March 12th, we will not see a quorum of our membership. But I would encourage people to plan to attend in April, and I think we'll wait until it's closer to that to take a head count for that. Okay, are there any other event announcements, or does anybody have questions or comments about those events before we move on? Also, members of the public are welcome to ask a question at this point. Okay, I'm not seeing any response. Our next item is the approval of minutes from January 12th. Vince, if you want to put those up on the screen. I did offer an edit to Vince on a statement that I made to enhance it. Did anyone else have comments or questions about the minutes of January 12th?
Move approval.
We want to get that. Okay, a second for the approval motion.
Second.
Okay, and then further discussion. I just want Vince to show the edit that I suggested. Make sure everybody is aware of that. So I simply added some context to the statement that was attributed to me. Did we have any other edits, Vince?
No, just the one that I'll have to correct after this meeting once I get the correct final presentation from Trevor so that I can post that to the town website, and then I'll put in the correct link here.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, roll call vote to approve the minutes. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Peter Brace.
Aye.
Graham Durovich.
Abstain.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
I don't see Ian. Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Fritz McClure.
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. So I believe that's 7 for, 1 abstention, and 1 person not available. Okay, thank you, Vince. If you want to take those down. Next item on our agenda is review of the Acclimate Partner Agreement. And Vince has that available to display on the screen. It was also sent out, I believe, to all the members. So the context here is some time ago, we voted to make me the committee's representative to the Acclimate group, which I have attended their meetings, and they have issued a partner agreement. So the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee and the town of Nantucket are currently listed as partners with Acclimate in their initiatives. And in order to, I guess, maintain that status, Acclimate is requesting that we commit to the partner agreement. Kim Rose, if you're available, do you want to say anything to introduce this to the public?
Sure. So
Okay.
this affirmation came from just a more formal way to add partners. It was part of our 5-year strategic plan. And it's just basically reinforcing the ideas of Acclimate, and that it's community centered, focused on helping each other, open communication, and providing welcoming environments for everyone who is involved in resilience efforts. Is really pretty much everything that it is saying. It's just a reinforcement of what we've talked about.
Okay, and I don't have any objection really to this. I just wanted to make sure that it went through the members of the committee and they had an opportunity to ask questions and express their opinion as to whether the committee should join by signing this. Are there any questions or opinions to offer? Okay, so the only question I had would be at what level do we sign this? Do we sign it as a committee? Does the Natural Resources Department sign it on our behalf? Does the town admin sign it on our behalf? And so I would make a motion that we authorize Vince to investigate who the proper signatory is and proceed with that signature being applied to this document, whoever that might be. Can I get a second for that? And then we'll go to discussion.
Second.
Thank you, Fritz. Discussion. Sarah, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if it would be possible for the like Mary or representing the CRAC committee sign it as well as the Natural Resource Department, as well as potentially, Libby and town management. I think the more signatures, that are shown on the Acclimate website as like supporting these endeavors, I think is beneficial. And so I was wondering, instead of going at the top as, it would be great to have the highest level, and then, but that was just one opinion.
I think that's a great idea. So Vince, can you find out if we can get all 3 levels, and if not, then whatever levels are appropriate? Great. All right, so we have the motion made and seconded. If there's no further discussion, we'll take a roll call vote. Gary Beller. Gary, you're muted. Gary, you're still muted. I'm sorry, I can't tell what you're saying.
Okay, you can hear me now, but I can't.
Yes.
Yes, but I have a question. When I look at the resolution, although I can't see it because my screen is not working now, it seems like we're joining them when they should be joining us. It's a little strange to me. I mean, we're all in support of the same goals, but basically we are the town's entity, and Acclimate is a separate entity, and we have to do what we think is right for the town, and we hope Acclimate will make sure that their policies agree with what we come up with as the best town strategy. The way it looks now, as though we're agreeing to conform to what Acclimate may come up with at some point, which sounds a little strange to me.
Well, we do have a voice in Acclimate in order to help shape those and ensure alignment. But I think the partner affirmation is exactly what you're asking for, Gary. It's to ensure that we are all aligned. Kim, if you want to say more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Acclimate does not make its own policies. We are supporting everybody else. So we are the one that is promoting and advocating. So if the town says that it's publishing the Coastal Resilience Plan, then we're going to back the Coastal Resilience Plan because that's the direction the town wants to go in, and that the community supports because we assume that the town is acting within the best interest of the community. So this is basically just a mutual partnership, and that's what the partner affirmation is saying, that everyone involved in Acclimate and everyone involved believes in these things, believes in education, believes in advocacy and holistic approaches, and that Acclimate will also support whatever our partners decide to do. But we are not telling the town to do something. We're not telling our partners to do anything. We are just supporting them in any way possible.
Okay.
Okay, so if there's no further discussion, I'll return to a roll call vote. Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Graham Durovich,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Fritz McClure,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you all. And Kim, look for that after Vince has figured out how we can get their signatures on there.
Thank you.
All right, next item on the agenda is we're skipping the homeowners brochure, and so we're going to the continuation from the January 12th meeting of the discussion with Arcadis for engagement planning framework and evaluation criteria for the Coastal Resilience Plan. These were provided in the meeting minutes as discussion points. And Trevor, are you going to share your screen, or how do we want to proceed here?
Yeah, I can share my screen.
Okay. And I'll turn it over to you to lead us through the discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me know when my screen is visible.
Yes, you've got all of the toolbars down the top
Yeah.
left.
Okay, great. I think I'll leave it in this view because it allows me to still see the committee as well, rather than sharing my full screen, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Great. So we're looking forward to the open house on January 28th that Mary mentioned. We have received, I think at last check, around 90 RSVPs, which I think is really great. We've seen a huge uptick, thanks, I think, to efforts by Vince and Mary and our team to really try to get the word out. So we'll have a great turnout. I'm sure there'll be some drop off from that 90 number, but I'm hoping most of those who have RSVP'd do turn up for the conversation. So today we're just going to pick up where we left off last Tuesday, or 2 Tuesdays ago, I should say, when we discussed sort of engagement planning. What we didn't cover were sort of 2 items on the agenda. The first was a discussion of the draft working evaluation criteria, and I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean when I say evaluation criteria in a moment. And then second, just kind of a teaser on the kind of risk and vulnerability assessment that we'll be working on, basically is already working on, but we'll really start to focus on after our January 28th open house, and look to circle back with the CRAC during our next kind of check-in, which will likely happen in April. Mary and I are working on scheduling. I think we have a date fairly fixed, but I'll defer to Mary on the scheduling moving forward. So with that, I'll start to walk through these slides on the evaluation criteria. So what are evaluation criteria? Evaluation criteria describe priorities. They're basically the priorities a community may have related to how coastal resilience is achieved. Community members will be asked through our process to define and rank the criteria to help our team and the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee tailor solutions that align with community priorities. I'm sort of I was hesitant to even use the term evaluation criteria because I find it a little bit inaccessible and technical. It's something that we use internally, so I'm sharing it here. But really, what we mean is priorities. What is most important for a solution that achieves coastal resilience to align with in terms of prioritization. And you know, this is also a conversation about co-benefits that can be achieved through a particular solution. So there's, the way that we're thinking about it here, there are 6 categories of evaluation criteria. There's effectiveness, implementation feasibility, design life and adaptability, ecological and public health, equity and quality of life, and value creation. I'll talk a little bit more about each of these as we go through. So a little bit about how the criteria will be defined as we move through this process. So we're entering kind of the community engagement phase 2 with our January 28th open house. This is really about code definition and prioritization of evaluation criteria with the community. We won't talk about evaluation criteria on Thursday, but we will talk about what is most important to you. What are the priorities that you have? And that is an input to defining the evaluation criteria. Once we have what we feel like are a good set of criteria, we'll begin to use that to assess the toolkit of feasible resilient solution alternatives. So thinking about how does the broadest toolkit that I've talked about before, from structural to nature-based to policy to education and guidance, how do each of these different tools align with the evaluation criteria? That helps us refine the toolkit to a set of options that are aligned with the values of Nantucket, of the community. And then it also informs our scoring criteria. And so the scoring criteria is how we come up with something that Vince talks a lot about, the prioritization. It helps us understand, map across a range of criteria from cost to technical feasibility to permittability and regulatory compliance to co-benefits, across a range of criteria to really rank projects for prioritization based on these criteria. So the evaluation criteria are really an input to what is then a more technical scoring process that results in a prioritization of projects. And all of that will be laid out in the report and clear, so that there's no magic behind the scenes that's not clear. The math will be shown. And ultimately, as I just mentioned, that will result in a preferred ranked set of solutions that's based on performance against those scoring criteria. And each of the community engagement phases has some input. I think as we get towards the sort of scoring and prioritization, it's much more of a kind of technical assessment against those scoring criteria. But ideally, they're aligned with the priorities and evaluation criteria that have been co-defined with the community. And that's what we're here today to begin to do. I think that you have been, I think that Vince has presented to this committee before on something called STAPLY. STAPLY stands for Social, Technical, Administrative, Political, Legal, Economic, and Environmental. It is a sort of a framework for evaluating projects and scoring projects that's used by FEMA, the Army Corps, and other governmental bodies. Essentially, when we talk about evaluation criteria, we're talking about a refinement of STAPLY. They're not mutually exclusive. They're really just kind of aligned. And what we try to define as evaluation criteria based on STAPLY categories, but that are more derived from what we know about Nantucket, what we know is important, and can define with a little bit more, I think, a little bit more detail and a little bit more responsiveness to local conditions. So when I say evaluation criteria, it's not that we've dismissed the STAPLY categories. It's actually that we're refining them for this project. And so, I mean, what's shown here is probably not too visible, but the STAPLY scoring from the Nantucket Hazard Mitigation Plan, which I'm sure you all are familiar with, and then a more kind of visual and community-facing evaluation criteria that was developed by our team for another project in Boston. So, looking at effectiveness, feasibility, design life and adaptability, social impact, equity, value creation, and environmental impact were what were chosen for that project. So again, we're here today to think about the draft evaluation criteria together. And our goal is to refine these criteria and the language and what's included and what's not included to make sure they capture the full range of considerations for assessing different resilient solution alternatives before we then work with the community at large, or speak with the community at large about what is most important to them. So this is all of the criteria mapped across the 6 categories. There's 43 criteria. We'll walk through each of these together individually. And I think, Mary, what will probably make sense, as we've done in the past, I'll present each set of criteria in each category and then turn it over to you for a roll call kind of commentary, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So effectiveness. Effectiveness is the first category. It captures priorities related to a solution's alternatives effectiveness in addressing coastal risk to homes, businesses, critical facilities, and infrastructure. So it's capturing, you know, how is a particular alternative, how is it reducing risk, and is it able, what is its effectiveness in reducing risk? So the criterion are level of coastal flood protection. And when we say that, we mean, you know, what types of storm events, what design elevations is it protecting to? Reduction in flood extent and depth. So is it performing its function in actually reducing flood extent and depth? Is it providing a benefit in terms of avoided damage and disruption to the community? Is it reducing flood risk to residences? Is it reducing flood risk to businesses? Is it reducing flood risk to the transportation network? Is it protecting critical assets? Is it protecting the national historic landmark status? Is it assisting with the community's ability to recover more quickly? So not just protecting, but if a flood does occur, does it enable a quicker recovery than would have been provided beforehand? And then finally, is it providing multiple lines of protection? And again, I should stress, you know, these are not mutually exclusive, and we would expect that most alternatives would check all, if not most of these boxes, right? So it's really about making sure that we've captured the full range of effectiveness criteria here that we would want to capture through our evaluation of particular alternatives and projects.
So Trevor, I have a question about this category.
Mhm.
I noticed that most of these are technical or economic, and so should we be looking for additional measures of effectiveness that address other areas such as political or social or that's you know, public health, so those kinds of impacts?
So you're asking if I see. I think if I understand correctly, you're saying, should we be defining other criteria that are effective at effectiveness in reducing risk to public health as another category?
For instance.
Yeah, for example. Okay. I think that is captured on the under the other categories in terms of the benefits that a solution would provide. So I wouldn't necessarily cross pollinate the categories in that way.
Okay, so then under effectiveness, one question I had would be for longevity of the project. A project is more effective if it will be useful for a longer time period.
That's a good one. And I think that's captured a little bit under the adaptability and design life, but I think it's worth capturing here as well.
Graham has a question.
Are we looking at erosion as well here, or just mainly flood?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's an interesting question about, you know, reducing risk when it comes to erosion, because it's, you know, there's obviously multiple different perspectives on it, and it's not just a question of stabilization and reducing risk. There's probably a question about you know, it's more a question of you know, are there policy solutions, non-structural solutions that might reduce risk? So I think it is captured here, although it's not mentioned by name in the criterion of avoided damage and disruption to a community. So you can map a potential policy-based solution for reducing risk from erosion to that category. I think we could talk about adding a criteria that is something to the effect of reduces the rate of erosion or slows erosion, controls erosion in a way that reduces risk. We can think about the exact language, but I think that's a question for the committee about whether we want to have that in the criteria. To me, it seems like it's assuming a certain potential solution that may not be particularly acceptable to all. I think these are meant to be as neutral as possible so that it's not presuming any particular outcome.
Graham, do you want to follow up and then we'll go to Fritz?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. I think my one concern is looking at this initially, it does seem to focus on flood risk. So if there are a way to preface maybe all of this, that we're looking at all impacts of coastal resilience when it's introduced, and this one just happens to call it flood risk, but in terms of effectiveness and avoiding damage and disruption to the community, we're not just looking at flood risk, but everything that is encompassed in this.
That's a great point.
And I think at the top of the slide, you're talking about coastal risks, Trevor, so maybe a little bit more use of that term as opposed to constantly defaulting to flood.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Fritz, do you want to go ahead?
Basically, just supporting Graham's comment, and I think we've got it. As you look at it, I wouldn't want somebody to say, "Oh, all this deals with is flood, doesn't have anything to do with erosion." So, if in the appropriate categories, we could either say flood and erosion, or erosion, or just I think you've got it. As long as we can define that what we're talking about, the risks includes erosion, risks of erosion. I think we're all right. I just wouldn't want to see it not mentioned at all.
Sarah, and then Jen.
Hi, Trevor. Thank you so much. And my question, you may have said this, but I'm thinking about it as I'm like reading it more deeply. With thinking about the effectiveness, are each of these line items weighted the same, or are some weighted more heavily, where there's like, if it's not just a yes or no, if it's like, because if it avoids damage and disruption to the community, like that might weigh heavier than, I don't know, I can't think of, but like going through it and thinking which of those criteria have more value or the least disruptive. Like if for example, if a solution is the least disruptive solution and still attains a significant amount of goals, like I would weigh that more heavily as a positive. Just curious about that.
Yeah, the weighting often comes in when the scoring, actually, when you get to the sort of final set of criteria that the projects are scored against, then you can have a conversation about weighting things like cost, for example, weighting that more heavily than others, or like you said, sort of disruption to other, the ecosystems or other systems on the island could be weighted highly as we don't want to do that. So I think there's two ways to think about the criteria. It's either kind of a yes or no, like yes, this is important, or no, it's not important, or I'm not sure. The other way is to ask for a prioritization, for people to actually sort of say, no, effectiveness is not as important to me as public health, or conservation of the environment, effectiveness of a solution. So those are two ways to approach this. I prefer the yes, no, because I think that it's not easy to rank all of these necessarily, and there's a lot of trade-offs involved. So that's the way I prefer to look at it. But I think your point about weighting is something that definitely comes in down the road as we start to score these.
And members of the community will have different opinions. For instance, National Historic Landmark status would be extremely important to some, where avoided damage might be extremely important to somebody who's on the coast, where flooding might be extremely important to the transportation network. So it gets hard to balance those. And I think Trevor has a point about you might have to fall back on a yes, no, or on, an end of the line sort of prioritization. Jen had her hand up, and then I think Vince afterward.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Trevor. I just had maybe 2 questions or possibly clarifications. And then one was effectiveness of critical assets. Would you say that that would include, I'm just thinking of the infrastructure as being something that's really important, particularly in the downtown, the sewer, the water, those pieces that they're not quite transportation, they're infrastructure for keeping town running, if that would fall under that category.
Yep. Yeah, that's critical infrastructure. I mean, infrastructure, maybe not as critical as critical infrastructure is often sort of ranked based on its own set of criteria.
Right.
So things like that truly support life safety, like a hospital or access to food and drinking water. Certainly, the stormwater system is probably a little bit less critical than, say, the potable water delivery system. But yes, to answer your question,
Okay.
those are considered infrastructure that would be evaluated as at risk and potentially in need of protection.
Right. And, kind of just a corollary to that, if it made sense to have a separate section for, what you said, those the critical infrastructure that are key for, and maybe that comes later under, public health, just to pull those out. Critical asset. And then there's, kind of, as you mentioned, those things that are really key for life of the community.
That's a good point. I mean, I think it actually would make sense to add in something that teases out the term criticality a little bit more, so that there's infrastructure that's important to the well-being of the community, and then there's infrastructure that's important to life safety.
Correct.
Yeah, critical
Great.
as opposed to supportive, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Jen.
you.
Okay,
And
Vince, and then I'm sorry, Jen, go ahead, and then we'll go Vince and then Fritz.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I had just one more tied to that, and that was just the idea of the transportation network. And again, maybe this is just me picking things apart, but there's I think of transportation network as, say, the Washington Street corridor out of town. There's importance in protecting that, but then there's an extra level of importance when you're thinking of transportation related to the ferry docks, and whether there's like a separate level of access to the outside world kind of transportation designation versus on-island transportation.
I like that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mainland access versus intra-island access.
Yes.
Okay, Vince.
Thank you, Mary. So just went back and had a look at the Stepley scoring system. So Trevor, the way Trevor has explained it is perfectly accurate. Every category, say a project is proposed, every category, technical, legal, economic, etc., gets a score, and it's a yes or a no, or a 1 or a 0 in scoring terms. And then you end up with a score between 0 and 7, and that's how you end up prioritizing a project. 4 are higher is high priority, 3 is medium and low. So then that's kind of where the priority comes in. So that's kind of how we end up looking at the how we end up looking at it numerically in the end.
Yeah. You can also, I mean, you can do 1, 0, like sort of a binary thing, or you can also come up with a larger scale. So from 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, and it can even depend on, what the criteria is. So cost could have a ranking of 0 to 5 with each number associated with a certain dollar range. And other categories may just be a simple yes or no, 1, 0, and then you're still adding up at the end to come up with a solution, and all of the options are ranked against each criteria in the same way.
Okay,
Fritz? There are different ways we can do it, and I think it's something we'll come back and talk with this committee about what is the preference there.
That's what I was just thinking, Trevor, is we might be getting too far down the road at this point. Fritz, please go ahead.
Just wanted to support the notion. I think, again, critical assets. I think we need some elaboration of what that means. People might be very confused about what critical assets are. I mean, it may not occur to them that that's what we were talking about. They may think it's something completely different. So
Mhm.
somehow an IE or an asterisk or something like that that kind of highlights the kinds of things we're talking about.
Mhm. That's a good point for Thursday as well.
Yeah, definitions. Yeah. Okay, Trevor, please proceed.
Great. This is really helpful, and I greatly appreciate these comments. I think it's a great discussion. So the next category is implementation feasibility. And again, I think most of these, from my perspective, are very important because these are the criteria that help us think about whether something is achievable, especially in the near term. But it's worth thinking about, from the community's perspective, what is most important about the implementation of a project. So this category captures priorities related to a solution's feasibility given technical, regulatory, funding, community support, and operations and maintenance considerations. So the criterion are community buy-in, that it's well supported within the community. Relatedly, political support, so the town's elected officials support the project. Constructability, that it can be built or it can be undertaken. Permittability, that it's able to be permitted under current regulatory regimes and frameworks. Fundable, so the project has the is of the type that is able to be funded whether through local, state, or federal funds or private. Cost effective, so that means that the benefits of the project outweigh the costs. Time to enjoyment, maybe that's interested to hear feedback on that phrase, but what it means is that it can be delivered, the project can be delivered quickly, or that there is, the amount of time needed to actually deliver the project is proportional to the benefits that it achieves. Feasibility, so this is another way of thinking about, you can start a project and have a certain degree of benefits or enjoyment of it, and then later phases would, add to or complement those benefits, but that there's a sort of a ability to phase a project so that you don't need to undertake it all at once. Operations and maintenance considerations. So this is something that's often neglected in thinking about capital projects in particular, that once you've built it, you've got a whole other set of needs related to operations and maintenance. And this is really important when we're thinking about flood protection infrastructure, if that is recommended through the plan, where, in order for that infrastructure to maintain effectiveness, it needs to be maintained very rigorously, and there are costs associated with that. Replicability, so I think we've talked a little bit about pilot projects before, so thinking about whether a project that may be a pilot or maybe not a pilot, but just the beginning of a larger process can easily be replicated, so that it's not a question of reinventing the wheel every time a project goes up for funding or for approval. Sustainability co-benefits. So I think this relates also to another category we'll see later on public and ecological health, but are there benefits that can be achieved in carbon sequestration or other types of sustainability and climate change mitigation benefits? And then finally, consistent with design standards. And I think with design standards, we're talking about standards that either do exist or may exist related to historic structures and the character of the historic districts on the island.
Right, so we have comments on these. Anything you want to add to this list or have a question about? Trevor, I did have a question. We've talked briefly about things that might create an economic benefit. So this might fall under fundable. What I was thinking, if there's a solution that can create an economic benefit, whether that's a increase in taxable value or it's a fee associated, so that there are funds generated that flow back to the town to help pay for the solution, that would be more feasibly implemented because it creates its own funding. Jen?
Thank you, Mary. I'm wondering if there should be a category that kind of looks at the scale of a project and the implementation, kind of on two tracks. One, is it, and this might not necessarily say it's better or worse than something that protects a large area, but could separate out solutions for, say, something that's implementable on private property. So this is a solution that, you could use on your small scale that would have a big impact for you. And then I'm also thinking about the permitting side of things, where sometimes, particularly in Massachusetts, things are permittable first on a smaller pilot scale before larger implementation. And maybe those priorities or those solutions might be something that pop to the top faster than something else.
Nice, yeah.
Other thoughts on this category? All right, if not, then Trevor, when you're ready,
Great.
you can proceed.
Yeah. Just jotting down some notes here. Yeah, I think, Jen, that's a really good point. I think related to scale and the potential to move the needle on projects that may not be permittable from DEP on a larger scale because of the impacts, but that there's a recognition of the need to sort of understand at a very small scale, what works and what might not work, so that, as we get down the road and there may be regulatory reforms, there's data to support that. And I think Nantucket very much can be, I think there's an opportunity to be a leader in that kind of space. And this is design life and adaptability. We'll talk more about this on the 28th. I'm gonna get a little bit more depth about what we really mean when we say resilience and what a resilient solution is. And one of the things that is related to that is adaptability and the ability to provide protection over time in a way that is flexible and not fixed. So more on that to come, but these criteria are related to that. So the first is about the horizon of protection. So, is it with flood risk increasing due to flood and erosion risk increasing due to sea level rise and climate change? What is the level of protection that we're looking to achieve? Is it protection against the storms we expect to see today? Is it the ones, protection against storms that we expect to see mid-century? Or are we looking as far out as 2100? Or should we be designing solutions for the end of the century? And then the second, and related to that, is adaptability. So building on what I was just saying, solutions can be developed today that protect to mid-century, but with the with the criteria and supports that allow for adaptability to a higher, let's say, design flood elevation over time as we observe risk, how risk is changing or increasing over the coming decades.
Great. Any comments or questions? All right, Trevor, if you want to move on to the next section.
Okay, great. Oh, I think there'll probably be comments here, and again, building on some of the comments from earlier, ecological and public health. I think, this is about the impacts that a solution can have to the health of natural and human communities over time. So again, this also related to the question of what a resilient solution is versus just a risk reduction solution. So, in terms of priorities here or criteria, water and air quality benefits, habitat creation and protection, public health benefits, ecological adaptability, alignment with natural systems. And I think this is one where we start to see the trade-offs between effectiveness criteria and other kinds of goals that the community may have. So a solution, for example, that has habitat creation and protection benefits, may be at odds, not necessarily, and certainly there's multi-beneficial options and alternatives here, but may be at odds with an effective, totally effective flood risk reduction.
Comments or questions for Trevor on this section? Yes, Peter?
I don't know if this goes under public health benefits or maybe it's a separate criterion all by itself, but it just struck me that, you know, we're going through COVID right now. We're going to keep going through that. I don't know how long, but that has a mental impact on everybody. And there are various levels of stress in our lives right now. Here we are at home on our computers instead of, anyway. So now we're going to tell everybody, or we're telling everybody, the impending doom of the island being inundated slowly. I don't know, it's a lot to deal with. I just think that maybe there's consideration for that somewhere in this.
Yeah.
And Peter, I was thinking along the same lines. I wrote down as a criteria peace of mind.
Yeah. Something like that.
And you could call that mental health. You could call that stress, avoidance. To me, it harkens back to my comments about the sense of Nantucket as a refuge or a haven from stress and from the pace of the modern world. There's something about Nantucket. People come here to get away. And they don't really want to be confronted with more sources of stress for whatever those might be. So just the peace of mind that Nantucket is still Nantucket, that it's still an escape, that it's still everything it has been to so many people for so long.
And so if I just follow up on that, in reference to what I said at the last meeting about having to scare people a little bit, to me just seems to make sense, because yes, Nantucket is an escape, and I just think you reach a point where you're just blocking it out. It's like, oh, we've got COVID. Now we've got, more strains of COVID that are even worse. And when am I going to get vaccinated? When am I going to get out of the house? And oh, by the way, the water's coming up to my doorstep, and enough. And so maybe you don't get the engagement out of people that you want to, because people have had enough. They're blocking that away. Nantucket's my safe place. I don't live on the mainland. I don't have to deal with all that stuff. Here I am now in a snowless winter, more and more things taken away that you're not having to deal with, but you have COVID and you've got the ocean coming up. I'm rambling, so.
Well, I think you're not wrong, Peter. You can add, economic uncertainty, affordable housing. I mean, there's certainly no end to sources of stress, and just because you're on Nantucket is not a guarantee of an escape from those. But for many people, that's their emotional feeling about Nantucket, is they're escaping something somewhere else.
Yeah.
Sarah, I think you had your hand
joy.
up. Yeah. Thank you, Trevor. That's a great way to put it.
Thanks, Mary. So I don't know if this might be captured in another area, but I kind of looked around. But in terms of ecological health, I was thinking of obviously solutions that create a benefit are important, but I also would want to somehow put a negative to a project that creates a potential ecological problem. So there might be a solution that's great for, keeping water out and protecting homes and lots of things, but one of the negatives that might downgrade it would be something that, disturbs the sea floor or something like that. So I don't know if there's an area where something like that is covered, other than just being, like you don't give it a 1 for a positive.
Sarah, I think you froze. I see other people are still active. So we'll come back to you. Matt, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mentioned this to Trevor and Vince after. Somewhere in here, we should have public
give
access.
it a 0 for not being a benefit of ecological harm.
Okay, I think we got Sarah in. Sarah, if you can still tell, I think you froze again. Sorry, Matt, do your best.
I'll try.
Yeah.
No, I just think for Nantucket public access, it should enhance or maintain accessibility. Most of our, one of the biggest concerns people have with various projects is if they impact that aspect of the island. So that has to be in our criteria, in our scoring somewhere.
When you say accessibility, Matt, are you referring to waterfront accessibility or what specifically? You're talking about
waterfront,
access or
waterfront, beachfront, being able to access the beach, sort of the things that we as an island have been sort of promoting and protecting for 300 years. That's a different, Nantucket looks at it slightly different than somewhere else. If you go and walk on the beach, you go on the North Shore and you can't walk the beach on a high tide because some of the old structures stop you. So how do we take into consideration and give more weight to ones that don't, or that have a way to walk up and over? I mean, it's sort of, if we're not careful, it's something that we will lose in a lot of areas.
Thank you, Matt. Graham?
I'm wondering about the committee's thoughts on changing health in some of these places to well-being. I find people typically think about health as the absence of disease rather than well-being, being more well-rounded in terms of, being fulfilled and de-stressed, and a lot of the things that I've heard people talk about as we've been talking about this page.
Trevor, is that a comment that you're comfortable with, or have you seen that in other communities that reference, and maybe it's health and well-being?
Yeah, I mean, I think the public health is, I think that you could easily swap out health and with the term well-being. I think well-being is actually, I agree with Graham, it's a little bit more inclusive. To me, that includes public health. In order to, in order for a community to have well-being, people need to be healthy. But it also captures a lot of other elements of community sort of well-being and vibrancy. So I would be in favor of that. I think public health is more quantifiable, I would say. So I think the reason that term is often used is because it can be, public health can be measured, right? Whereas well-being is a little bit more difficult to measure, but I think that's okay to be a little bit more qualitative on something like this.
I'm just thinking that public health is very top of mind for people because of COVID, and I wouldn't want to give the impression that we were not including that. So if it makes sense to say health and well-being, or if it makes sense to say well-being and define it as to what goes into that, whatever works. Okay, other comments on this section, or Jen, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mary. First, I put it in the chat, but Sarah Boyce let me know that her internet went out and she's going to attempt to rejoin us, hopefully. The other piece here is that and I don't know if this is in the next section, Trevor, it might be, but I see them kind of overlapping with this public health, public well-being piece. The idea that any benefit that, this goes along with what Matt was saying, protects areas that are our open space and ecologically important areas, but that are also those places that are super important for public access. That drives one of the things that makes Nantucket so unique, is how much of the island is protected open space that is open to the public, where you can go run and bike and walk and access those things that are both health, wellness, and mental, physical wellness and mental wellness as well. If there's some kind of category that could capture that or rank that for a solution. Mm-hmm.
So kind of preserves a preference for protecting and preserving protected open space, open space that is available to the public now should be kind of prioritized in terms of its, protection is the wrong word, but in terms of, ensuring that remains accessible to the community.
Yeah, and then even a corollary to that, if there are solutions that build in that public access, if you're doing some kind of solution along the waterfront that has a protective piece, it also has a public access piece tied.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, so I see that Sarah looks like she's been able to rejoin us. I'm going to assume on audio only to help with an unstable internet connection. And I note that Gary Beller did tell us he was going to have to leave around 11. It looks like he has left. So just those notes. Trevor, if you're ready to move on to the next section.
Yep. And actually, just one final note on this: the term ecological adaptability, I think, probably needs some work. What we mean by that is thinking about things like wetland migration and the need to leave room, where desirable for the migration of wetlands upland over time. So that's just to clarify that that's what that means. And maybe we can just sort of lay that out for what it is in the criteria, providing an opportunity for the adaptability of natural systems.
Jen, yes, please.
Yeah, Trevor, I agree. And I like that last piece that you just said, maybe providing or even facilitating natural systems to adapt where they provide that benefit piece. Somehow we could incorporate that.
Yep. Yeah, I think the alignment with natural systems is also a little bit of a nod to the, the erosion question of natural process versus risk, and so I'd like to understand, is alignment with natural systems a high priority when it comes to something like erosion versus protection?
Fritz, do you want to comment on that?
Just generally in terms of a lot of these criteria and that we're talking about, and I'm not sure what you can do about it, but I've gone through similar types of exercises. We had one a year or so ago, and we were talking about placement of roundabouts and things like that, where you're prioritizing. And the issue, if you're asking someone to take a look at this and then somehow scale them or say how important are they, they're very, very general categories. And the problem that I foresee is people will look at them and say, I don't know what that means. So is there any way, or do you think it would be helpful if there were examples given? If you say, alignment with a natural system, for example, because if I look at a lot of these, I would just kind of almost throw up my hands and say, I can't do this because I don't understand what it says, to be quite honest.
Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
No,
you go ahead, Mary.
It brings to mind a theme that is frequently present in public participation, in which the experts are asking the public to offer opinions on things that the public has no information about and no experience with. And so, that's just a trap to avoid falling into. You can't ask a member of the public, how would you rate this on its adaptability to natural systems, without providing any context and any, education on how natural systems work.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just to be clear, I mean, the intention is not to just take these and send it out to the general public and ask people to respond. I think we'll think carefully about, this terminology won't appear on Thursday, for example, and we'll think carefully about how to phrase this as likely part of a survey, how to capture the same input without necessarily using the same presentation framework that I'm here talking with you about today.
Peter, comments?
And maybe whatever we do send out to the public, and it does have these terms in it, you could have a glossary so people can refer to it. People aren't stupid. They'll look at the glossary and go, oh, that's what that means. And now I know how to contribute.
Yeah. I like the idea of examples. I think people do respond to, examples with making sure we have a glossary and definitions attached to that.
Madam Chair, can I?
Yes, go ahead, Sarah. Thank you for letting me know.
Oh yeah, sorry. Sorry about getting cut off. I'm at my office and my internet went out, so now I'm on my phone. But because I don't know how much you heard of what I said, was just asking if there was a way to kind of downgrade proposals that pose a negative risk to the environment, and I don't know if there was a follow-up. So I just wanted to kind of make sure that point was made.
Yeah, I have that recorded.
Okay.
Thank you, Trevor.
Okay, Trevor, it looks like you can move on.
Sure, 1 second. And then I think some of the comments that were made on the last slide apply here as well. And this is equity and quality of life. I think quality of life, community well-being, it's similar kind of terminology. These capture the priorities related to a solution's potential for improving quality of life and kind of protecting the community things that really make the community what it is and that are valued as part of the community's identity and character. So recreational benefits, I think that gets to the question about certain forms of public access, as well as the sort of community health and well-being. Protection of historic and cultural assets, I know is very important to many community members. Access to the water, we may want to think about, and I'd be curious to hear what the committee thinks on this, but maybe kind of breaking that apart into different forms of access, whether it's boat ramps or sort of access along a reach of beach versus a park that gives access to a specific portion of the waterfront. Education and community development, I think there's a huge opportunity for solutions to be educational resources to help teach people about climate change and what it means to be resilient and what it means to adapt to the changing climate. Opportunities for public art. I think another opportunity there, thinking about what are the ways that solutions could be utilized in really creative ways. I know that there's a significant artistic community on Nantucket. Community assets. So I think we could think about moving this to the effectiveness category. I almost did, but I think there's a strong rationale for pointing out, not just thinking about critical infrastructure, but the assets that the community views as integral to, the well-being and the health and the vibrancy of Nantucket overall. Things like affordable housing stock or community centers, community schools, places that really are important to the vibrancy of the people who live there. And then I think opportunities for increased community involvement. So are there solutions that actually generate more more community input or more energy around their development than other options may?
Comments on this section, Fritz?
Yes, maybe we've covered this before, but as I look at equity and quality of life, it's focusing on improving quality of life. Seems to me the most significant factor is loss of quality of life, which we've just talked about. So for instance, if you think about a very, very easy example was when we heard the people from Tuckernuck talking about what was happening in Tuckernuck and what the solutions were. I think in a very straightforward manner, they basically said, we wouldn't want to do anything that's going to change too much and we're willing to sacrifice most of the island for that, because for us, hard armoring the entire island of Tuckernuck to them would be a total loss of the quality of life that they have and appreciate in Tuckernuck. So it seems to me that rather than talk, have we gotten there somewhere in here?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that
what that is. I mean, it's the same way. If you say, how do you feel about controlling erosion? I mean, again, a simple example, but how do you feel about controlling erosion on the South Shore? And then it's basically, would you be willing to give up all of the beaches on the South Shore to control the erosion? That's the question. And I think most people would say no. So that's what, in terms of how far are people willing to go to protect themselves? And I think rather than the subtleties of, do we have opportunities for public art? I just want to make sure that we're really ferreting out here what what their values are. And I think Mary was getting at that. I mean, we live here because we love the beaches. We love the way we, going scalloping. We love access to the beach, being able to go out on our boats. How much are we willing to give up to protect certain parts of the island? And that, to me, we just got to make sure we get there and make sure that we're asking that question.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really
Well
important
said.
concept, Fritz. I think there is certainly a feeling among some people on the island that where we're going with sea level rise and erosion and flooding is acceptable compared to where we would have to go in order to prevent those things. Fritz, if that's sort of capturing what you're talking about. There are people who, either don't want to pay for or don't want to experience a loss of favorite activities in the name of, preserving something, against the will of nature, if you will. And I think that's a feeling we need to, as Fritz said, need to make sure that we measure and honor.
Can I make one follow-up comment on that? I think this is the broadest possible set of potential criteria, or that's how I'm framing it here. I do think that question, Fritz, that you raise, and Mary, the point that you're making, it applies differently in different parts of the island, right? So people may feel very differently about how they would prioritize something in downtown versus the South Shore or on Tuckernuck. So I think as we get into actually scoring and evaluating potential solutions, it's going to be based on sub areas or specific geographies where you have different risk contexts and different, frankly, values. And so I think that, but Fritz and Mary, the way you put it, I think is really important and well put.
All right, thank you, Trevor. Any other comments, or are we moving? Yes, Jen. And then Sarah, will come to you. I think that was you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mary. Trevor, you mentioned something about talking about access to the water, and I think it would probably be important to break out, recreational access versus access for work. So, the actual commercial access to the water, there's two different pieces there that are part of quality of life, people that need access, and then people that also then, enjoy the recreational piece and the tourism piece as well, I guess you could also put in there.
Sarah?
Yeah, so my comment was sort of similar, was in terms of access, but also protecting the working waterfront. I know from looking at the slides earlier that later you talk about creation of jobs, but I think, maintaining the economic viability, especially of the, as Jen was saying, the commercial access for, fisheries or anything that goes on in the water, and that type of access, because that access is very different. We know from like the hazard mitigation plan and things like that, like the need to bring boats in and out. And so ramps and or cranes and whatever for large boats is different than someone who wants to put a kayak in or wants to just walk to the beach to shore fish for fun, or, so those are really different types of access and people value them differently. So, and then the only other comment I had was, I don't know, I think it's part of quality of life, but also vistas. So the visual aspect, it's seems kind of silly, but the visual landscape and the view shed is, I think, for many constituents, very important, especially those who own property right on the water.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a good point. Jen. Jen, you're muted.
Yep. Thank you, Mary. One last comment, and that was on the equity piece of this section, and that, there's a lot of research out there that shows that those properties and homes and livelihoods that are most at risk are those that are tied to lower economic groups. And, of course, on Nantucket, a lot of our coastal areas are with our higher economic groups. But particularly if there are projects that the town is focused on paying for, there might be a benefit towards those projects that protect the lower economic groups, whereas the higher economic groups can afford to pay for some of their projects independently. Thinking about that social equity piece somehow. I'm not sure the right way to capture it, but
Yep.
should be a part of the discussion.
Yeah, like sort of ensuring that those who are least able to pay are adequately provided for.
That's a great way to say it, yes.
And taking that actually a little bit further, Vince shared with me an email that he received recently. And Vince, if you can perhaps read out that comment. And that is regarding stakeholders, including the natural world itself. So shorebirds, marine mammals, endangered species. Nobody has really provided them with a voice in this discussion yet, to my knowledge. Vince, would you share the comment that we received?
Sure. My email server is having trouble, but I can read it off my phone.
Okay.
So I can provide this to other members afterwards, members afterwards if needs be. This is from Trish Pastizak, a birder in Connecticut area. Hi Vince, I was watching the 2 crack meetings with Arcadis, and I have another group of stakeholders to add, the shorebirds. These are the ones that nest here, and also the ones that use our shore as resting and refueling stopovers on long migrations. I know I don't need to tell you about birds. I used to be the shorebird monitor. But perhaps you could put in a pitch for them. Also, horseshoe crabs lay their eggs here. And then she goes on to say about the fragility of the environment and the foreshore area.
Thank you, Vince. So I think this was a good moment to bring that in. It's not all people and sand. It's also other living creatures.
Can I ask a question? How does the committee feel? So I went back a slide here to the sort of habitat creation and protection. Should we change language to say something like wildlife habitat creation and protection, just to make sure that it's abundantly clear that we're thinking about the horseshoe crabs and the shorebirds and other forms of wildlife who call Nantucket home?
I think that's still addressing the question of habitat rather than the question of their actual lives. So I would maybe add a category, wildlife protection or something, similar. Or you could do habitat creation and protection of habitat and wildlife.
Yeah, I see. So maybe it's, actually maybe Jen, the
Jen, if you want to offer something.
Resident expert, I think I would defer to.
I would say, and I mean, this is all wordsmithing, so which I hate to do on the fly. I think habitat creation and protection covers wildlife and the life cycle of the species. That's what, if you're protecting the habitat, you're protecting the species. I think you could potentially put in some section, and again, this is a value judgment, but rare and unique species to Nantucket, because that is one of the things about Nantucket that is extremely special, is that we have a large number of rare plant communities, globally rare plant communities, and rare species and unique species that use us for habitat. So we could think about putting something like that in. And I just do want to assure the public that with the stakeholder comments, I know from the perspective of the Conservation Foundation, we did provide significant information on nesting shorebirds, rare species, species use of habitat, so that we are speaking for more than just the people, I think, within the stakeholders. Hopefully we're getting that covered, but the more comments from the public, the better as well.
Other comments. It looks like that we lost Sarah again, unfortunately. Jen, I have a question. When you say rare species, is that a legal definition? So for instance, is a bay scallop considered a rare species, even though it's a significant species to Nantucket?
There are legal definitions, Mary, both at the state and the federal level. And on Nantucket, we have species that are represented in both of those areas. And then we even have, as I mentioned, we actually have a community of vegetation community type that's considered globally rare, as the community type is unique as well as the species that use it. So there are definitely legal definitions we could hit.
So I'm wondering if we couldn't use something like, rare and endangered and protected, which all have legal definitions, but also just add something like significant or species of local significance, so that we can capture other species which are important to us as an island, but might not be under one of those legal definitions.
I think that's a great idea, particularly, economically important species we could capture. And then, species that are just, that are interesting and make life on Nantucket important. I guess you could look at that piece there. There are things that people come to Nantucket and kind of expect to see in some ways. So we could look at that.
Vince, a comment?
Yes, thanks, Mary. So I haven't yet had a chance to bring this up with Trevor, so I haven't mentioned it to him because, well, we haven't met yet about it. But I'm hoping that we can have a discussion at some point about including the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Programme at some point, just to understand those mapped areas, so that we can understand, say, everything from, I don't know, seal haul-out sites to potential nesting habitat for birds, and even where some of the rare plant areas are. But like I said, I have not yet had the chance to bring this up with Trevor.
Yeah.
And I think there was a suggestion made by the person who wrote the email that we might address this in a future meeting, the concept of mapping out and listing out those species that are significant in one way or another on Nantucket. And I think if we can get people to talk to us about that, it might be helpful to all members of the committee who perhaps don't have all of those details to understand them. And also to make that information available to the public.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Sarah.
Sorry, I keep going in and out, but I think I'm stable right now. Just in terms of the natural heritage information, we do have to be very careful about what we share with the public in terms of exact location of species, even some general ones. I mean, obviously seal haul out sites are known, but there's a lot of proprietary information, and with the state, we protect the location of species. Of course, like larger maps of habitat area are okay. I just wanted to have that in the record, that we have to be careful about what we do share.
Thank you, Sarah. Great point. Okay, Trevor, whatever you have next.
Great, and I think this is the final slide on evaluation criteria, and it pertains to value creation. So that, these potential solutions are not, again, one-dimensional or providing just a singular resilience or risk reduction benefit, but actually ideally creating value. And I think many of the other criteria we've talked about during this discussion have the potential to create value. This kind of just spells it out with more specificity. So when we talk about public access and recreation, there's not just the benefit that is related to people's ability to access the water and recreate. It actually improves the public realm and generates real estate value and other forms of value to the community. Potential to catalyze funding and investment. So thinking about what solutions may actually generate through protection or through creation of new habitat or recreational options, might actually catalyze new kinds of funding and investment in other forms of infrastructure or other types of buildings, or help drive the tourism economy. Those are examples. And related to that, the potential to protect the tourism industry, obviously the economic vitality of Nantucket is largely dependent on tourism. And so we want to make sure that is spelled out and prioritized, potentially prioritized as a key facet of what we're looking at here.
Trevor, if I can interrupt, I'd like to see more language there, maybe tourism dependent industries, not just tourism, real estate, building, sport fishing. I mean, there are a lot of industries that are dependent on the tourism. And there are some that aren't, like shellfishing is not really tourism dependent, but it is locally important. So perhaps, potential to protect tourism and other local industries, or just something that's a little more inclusive there and not solely focused on bringing people here to spend money on the short term.
Great. Yep. I think that's a great point. Potential to increase property values. And maybe there we could say potential to protect and increase or preserve and increase property values. Obviously risky properties are going to, over time, we've seen nationally, and this is already taking place in some communities where property values are dropping as a result of people, the market's recognition of risk. And so, that will come to Nantucket and probably already has in some limited cases. So we want to think about, what potential solutions can do to protect and increase existing properties and their values. Local tax revenues, that relates to the small businesses, but also thinking about strategic retreat as a potential option that does have an impact on the tax base, and that needs to be understood and evaluated. Potential to leverage partnerships. I think this is a huge opportunity for Nantucket to think about the potential regional, state, federal partners that can support work and over time, right? So, in addition, a single project can be the catalyst for a larger partnership that serves other benefits and creates other value over time. And then finally, the potential to create jobs. There is there is the potential to recommend infrastructure that is a significant expenditure, and will actually have a meaningful impact in terms of job creation potentially, and also the fact that resilience infrastructure is for better or worse an emerging field of specialization, and there will need to be people who are trained and able to work on the types of projects that we're considering. And I think that's a great opportunity for folks to develop a new skill set and find work. So including on Nantucket. So I think we'd want to think about that as well. Are there other ideas or I guess comments or refinements on the value creation category?
Graham and then Peter.
Could we add something along the lines of what we were talking about earlier with potential to, say, restore wildlife habitat or something like that, to something that's going to focus more on the natural ecosystem and its intrinsic value rather than instrumental value?
Yeah, I think your first one there, I have it as potential to improve public realm. That could mean anything or nothing to anybody, and maybe we can make that more inclusive of what Graham's talking about.
I am wondering if that one, I see as thinking about the Stapley categories, something being an environmental category, but also kind of the social well-being categories of, with the social well-being one being an instrumental, like something that gives back to us human beings with the environment, creating new areas for the public to engage with the environment, but then also something that's values the intrinsic value of the wildlife. It's not dependent on what we as humans get from them. Does that make sense? Or I see Jen nodding, so maybe she can explain better than me.
Jen, if you want to offer a comment, and then we'll go to Peter.
I agreed with what Graham was saying, that idea that providing value that's maybe not for us, but for something else, that intrinsic value, that, everything that's on this value creation category isn't necessarily value for humans, but, we need to consider that larger scale value that eventually will trickle down to us. I think that's what you're trying to say, Graham, right? That, yeah. I don't know how you word that, Trevor, but something like that.
Yeah, I mean, not all of these need to be measured in dollars and cents, right? I think we can because these are meant to be high level and help capture the community's definition of priorities, I think we can use terminology that is, protects and enhances the intrinsic value of Nantucket's, sense of community and well-being, or so we can wordsmith it and come up with something. But I think it's a good note to think about, both borrowing Graham's terms, the intrinsic and instrumental values here.
And Peter, you're muted.
Yes, 2 possible additional criterions, depending on what the group feels, the potential to make environmental stewards out of our children, our island students. I don't know how that would fit into the curriculum, but this is will be a defining, natural environmental event in their lives that they'll experience throughout their lives. They'll see significant changes to the islands going on before their eyes. There's got to be a way to tap into their knowledge, and then potential to study ecological impacts of an island of sand being impacted by sea level rise, climate change, as in we're a cautionary tale for other island communities.
I think that's a good point, Peter, and it brings to mind something that I wanted to mention somewhere here. And that is, while I'm sure that every community is unique and feels it is unique and different, Nantucket really is, but one of the values that we have is innovation, because so many of our circumstances and our historical ethics are different than in other places. Solutions that are directly sprung from those circumstances that are not copied from what other people are doing in a city or in a Midwestern town that's landlocked, or in a town that only has 50 years of history, or whatever the case may be. Things that are Nantucket-y, for lack of a better word, create value here. Other thoughts or comments here for Trevor? Fritz?
Just a simple one. If you look at the chart, we talk about protecting tourism, we talk about protecting and enhancing local tax revenues, but then we just talk about increasing property values. Shouldn't it be protecting / increasing or enhancing property values?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Peter?
Yeah, just one more thing. A way of describing what's unique about Nantucket or about an island, a word to use maybe is a word that is used by a group in Rockland, Maine called the Island Institute. It's an advocate for the 15 year-round island communities up there. And I don't know if they coined the phrase, but they use it a lot. It's called islandness, island NES. It can only mean one thing. It's the unique circumstances, the things you experience on the island.
Thank you, Peter. Vince?
I really like Pete's suggestion. I also have a contact with the Island Institute if we ever need to have someone come and speak.
Other comments? All right, Trevor, whatever you have coming next.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for all of your comments. Really, truly helpful. And I think kind of we'll go back and refine these, and I'll work with Vince to figure out how to share these out. Again, where our intention is not to put these criteria out to the public as you see them here and ask for feedback. We'll be thinking more creatively about how to engage people in a conversation about what's important and what their priorities are. That will then inform, how we shape these criteria and then ultimately what the sort of project scoring frameworks look like. But this has been very helpful to get your kind of input on this at this stage. Great. So the next set of slides here are a kind of a project status update and really just kind of a teaser as to what we're looking at as we move towards our move into the risk and vulnerability assessment and what will be included in our mid-project report. So before jumping in, I'll just say, these are not formal deliverables or meant to be the final versions, but just kind of an example of the types of graphics and kind of analysis that we're undertaking. But happy to answer any questions as we move through. So one of the most important parts of our early stages of our work has been mapping existing conditions, and this is just a set of example maps. We have a lot of data that we've compiled through our early process here, both kind of Nantucket based and from state and federal sources. I know you've probably seen a lot of maps like this in other town studies, but it's important for the CRP to also be grounded in an understanding of existing conditions, whether that be the built and natural environment or the regulatory conditions. So this is zoning, land value, who owns the open space, protected open space on the island, what are the land uses, building value, land value, I should have said, and sort of structure year built. We have this is all from a larger GIS database that we're drawing on for this analysis. And then as we kind of drill into a more fine-grained understanding, we're beginning to look at what are the this is a set of maps and a kind of analyses based on the roadway-based transportation network. I'll clarify. So looking at what are the roadways where you don't have redundancies, where you if a particular bridge or a pathway were to go out of service, you would have a community that is disconnected from other parts of the island. And so that to us, I think from our site visit was a key. Something key that came out of the places that we visited in terms of resiliency is making sure that people are able to move around the island and able to transport themselves from their community to, let's say, downtown where the ferry terminal is and other kinds of community resources. And we're also doing a lot of preliminary risk mapping. We'll have a much more in-depth approach to this, particularly related to what we call our quantitative risk assessment. And the quantitative risk assessment is very focused on the dollars piece of risk to infrastructure and buildings, and a key part of the kind of benefit cost analyses that will come out of this study for particular projects. And the importance of that is that benefit cost analyses are required for many federal grant programs and all federal grant programs, I should say, whether that's from FEMA or HUD or other sources. And I'm not sure if everybody's seen the sort of recent New York Times headlines, but under the new administration, there is likely to be a significant change. There already were under the previous administrations with the creation of the BRIC program, and that's momentum that will likely continue to unfold under the Biden administration, where we're likely to see potential for significant federal investment. So we really want to make sure that we're creating the data that is the data and the analyses that's really vital to plugging into federal grant applications that can be used for funding the recommendations coming out of the plan. So these are just what I would consider exposure maps based on elevation of buildings and roads. This is the downtown area as an example. But we also, when we look at the quantitative risk analysis, we're looking at, what are called depth damage functions. So the depth of flooding in particular buildings, what does that mean in terms of dollar value damages that can then be offset by a potential project to reduce that risk, if that makes sense. And I'm happy to answer questions about that, and we'll have much more about that in the mid-project report.
So Trevor, is that sort of a cost of not taking action metric?
Yeah, it's often referred to as losses avoided. So it's basically, this is what, under the no action, do nothing scenario, here's what you see. Here is the accrued risk by 2050 for a particular property. Now, if you build a project that reduces that risk through 2050, you're basically summing all of the dollar value associated with that reduced risk as the losses avoided.
I think that's important context. I saw an article recently about the idea of building a wall around Great Britain to protect some of the Northern European countries, and it was going to cost some number of trillions of dollars. But the comment in the article was, this is actually the cheapest form of protection.
Yep.
If you look at what's going to happen to those same locations if
Yep.
you do nothing.
Yeah,
it was a really interesting way of looking at it.
And it's also, I mean, for a place like Nantucket, it's also, you know, we won't know what the viable solutions are until we understand this risk, because there will be places on the island where, or there will very likely be places on the island where there isn't a cost beneficial infrastructure solution. You know, it doesn't, there's no edge solution that is going to be have a benefit cost ratio over 1.0, which is what's required. And so in those places, you might look at more building scale solutions are going to be more suitable, right? So protecting individual buildings, raising individual assets versus a larger potential district scale solution that may make sense in denser areas like downtown. So once we understand the risk, that helps inform the development and justification for different types of solutions, along with the rest of the evaluation criteria. And then as we're getting into, and we're working with Vince on this, the sort of coastal hazard analysis. So the first input to the risk analysis is making sure that we have a strong agreement and consensus around, you know, what are the risk, the sort of hazards that we're looking at, right? And what data are we using to understand those hazards? And we're actually launching this project at you know, I think at the best possible time in a way. You know, a lot of the there's been a lot of different analyses that have been undertaken for the island of Nantucket around erosion and sea level rise and coastal flood risk. We're lucky that the state has just or is about to release and has been working on for about 2 years now an initiative that is spurred by Mass DOT, but other state partners have also been involved to develop what it is recommending as kind of best, quote unquote, best available flood hazard data for all coastal communities in Massachusetts. And this is a model called the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model. And it really is sort of the state of the art in terms of coastal modeling. And so we've been working closely with Mass DOT and with their consultants to gain access to that data set and are looking to work with that as we undertake our coastal flood risk analyses. And the benefits of using it are that it is one, state of the art, best available, but it also is not just looking at the current day, but also into the future. So many are probably familiar with the FEMA flood insurance rate maps. Obviously, I think many are probably familiar with the sort of drawbacks on using FEMA data. One, that it looks historically, doesn't look into the future. The modeling that was done for Nantucket was actually done some time ago, although the maps were released, I believe, in 2014. The actual science underlying that was done in the late 90s, I believe. So I think we're very fortunate to have this robust, very recent data set at our disposal. Any questions on that before I move forward?
I just want to give Holly an opportunity to comment. I wasn't sure if she was raising her hand or just adjusting the monitor. You know, from the perspective of the hazard mitigation plan and the Resilient Nantucket work, Holly, is there anything you want to add here?
I think one of the biggest things from just an overall, by listening and hearing everybody, there's a lot of different initiatives that came out of the hazard mitigation plan. And again, that's something where we can, we don't have it, we can't request federal funding sources. So there's a lot of different initiatives that were put out in that plan, the original plan that was done in 2007, as well as the update. And this coastal resiliency plan, which we're all obviously in wanting to have done, and very appreciative of the work that Arcadis has done so far, will definitely be able to be the link, if you will, between those, and take those initiatives and priorities that were within the hazard mitigation plan and actually create them. And not, I guess specifically, for instance, there was one that you all were talking about integrating with the schools, for instance. And one of the priorities out of the HMP, which was strategy A18, was to develop a public outreach program that engages public school teachers, students, K-12, and works in appropriate climate science, sea level rise, hazard mitigation, and coastal resiliency planning into the curriculum. So it would be nice to see how the coastal resiliency plan can help us achieve a specific goal like that. There's a lot of integrations between these plans, and I'm just excited as everybody else. So
Thank you, Holly. Back to you, Trevor.
All right, great. I just added to the evaluation criteria notes something about the youth and engaging, youth in these conversations. And related to the other thing to mention about the Massachusetts hazard coastal flood risk model is that it is what is being used for what's called the Resilient Massachusetts Action Team, or RMAT. Some of you may be familiar with it. It is a state initiative that is essentially providing coordination across state agencies that are responsible for capital planning about how they are how they should integrate resilience and climate change into their planning and design processes. And from what I understand, it is likely that state grant applications will also, so things like action grants through the MVP program, CZM grants, will be required to use this process as well. So part of the justification for using this data set as well is that, we're setting up the town to be using the recommended state methodologies and data so that, you're on footing and no changes need to happen subsequently for funding applications. And that brings me to the next point, which is that the MCFRM utilizes the state's sea level rise projections, which were developed by the Northeast Climate Science Center at UMass Amherst. They are Massachusetts and Nantucket specific and very recent, and are what the state is recommending. And actually, these sea level rise projections were developed for the express purpose of providing Massachusetts communities with the, a standard set of sea level rise increments to use for planning and design purposes. So I'm still working with Vince on this, but we are likely to recommend a shift in the town's policy from what is currently the interim sea level rise policy drawing on NOAA's sea level rise curves, high values, to utilizing the state's high sea level rise values. This chart summarizes that. In the sort of shades of orange are the state, the blues are NOAA's, and you can see that in the 2030s through mid-century, the state's recommendations are actually more conservative. They actually suggest a higher amount of sea level rise. And then by the end of century, they're largely consistent, in some cases a little bit lower. But the thing to point out about the end of century is just the huge amount of uncertainty. Like the spread between the curves is very, very large when you get out that far. And it's, I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about a difference of a few inches in the year 2100, because these sea level rise projections are going to change in 5-year increments throughout time. And so we're going to continue to want to evaluate this over time, and make sure that we're drawing on the best available projections based on what we're observing in the real world. But for now, it does seem prudent to make that shift. I wouldn't recommend shifting the policy that CRAC has recommended until the CRP is complete, because I think it makes sense to, one, I don't think that the NOAA projections are sufficiently different that any mistakes are going to be made or opportunities missed. But I think that, you know, when we get to the end of the CRP, an action item for the CRAC maybe to revise the sea level rise policy.
Absolutely. That was the intent of our recommendation, that it only be interim until the coastal resilience plan had a recommendation. And also the mandate of our committee is to use the best available information and to stay up to date. So this is exactly what our intent is. And thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think we really, one of the early goals of our process here is to make a recommendation of what the consensus standard flood hazard data is, so that moving forward, the town has, you know, a strong sense of what that is, and there isn't confusion amongst stakeholders and various entities that are building and designing in the floodplain about what risk inputs they should use. And then finally, just the erosion analysis. This is some very preliminary mapping based on the FEMA study, no enhancements to that. We are looking at drawing on the FEMA study because it is very recent and gives us a good kind of basis to draw from. Doing a little bit further analysis of you know, what will happen to bluff erosion under different types of storm events under various sea level rise scenarios. So trying to get a really fine-grained understanding of how the coastal bluffs will change as a result of you know, both straight sea level rise, but also the return periods of storms over time, and the potential for, you know, not just sort of regular erosion rates, but also episodic erosion that can be, you know, as you all know, pretty significant in a short period of time. And then that's it for that project update. Again, much more to come as we develop the mid project report, and again, that'll have the kind of overview of our existing conditions, you know, mapping of assets and infrastructure and buildings, understanding criticality, and then assessing the full range of coastal risks to the island. And that is the presentation and discussion for today. And it looks like I wrapped up with a few minutes left, fortunately.
Okay, Vince, I'm going to ask you to put up the January 28th event announcement again, in case people missed that at the beginning, while we wrap up today. Questions, I'm going to ask the public if they have any questions rather than going to committee members. I just want to make sure that they have an opportunity. So is there any member of the public? Go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question or comment to offer before we end the meeting today. And a reminder that we do need to see your full name, or at least have you announce yourself in full before you speak. Okay, I am not seeing any immediate response. So if there are members of the committee that have a comment at this point, Peter, did I see you raise your hand?
Yes.
Okay.
Throughout today's meeting, I thought I had a place to tell the group about this, but I figure the bottom of the meeting is good enough, and then Vince can disseminate once I send him the information. I'm reading a book right now called A Meeting of Land and Sea, Nature and the Future of Martha's Vineyard. It looks like that. And it's written by a guy named David Foster, and he's the manager of the Harvard Forest. And so over the last 15 or 20 years, he wrote this book. It's all about the natural history of Martha's Vineyard, but it has lots of regional references. It references Nantucket a lot. And there is a section that I'm reading right now, which is called Shaping the Land. And he just got done talking about how the coastal processes made a house move back on Cape Pogue which we probably all heard about. It was the Shifter house. It's like 20,000 square foot or 8,000 square foot house, and they had to move it back because of the severe erosion. And I'm going to read a little passage if you just bear with me. It's just a few sentences. He says, finally, the quiescent period coincided with building boom that situated considerable new infrastructure, especially residences and commercial buildings, in harm's way. On the Vineyard, we are fortunate because the oversight of a coastal district of critical planning concern by the Martha's Vineyard Commission has greatly constrained construction in the most vulnerable areas. And so that's the term I wanted you to pay attention. Coastal district of planning, critical planning concern. It is a way, a tool for a planning board or the planning commission to potentially severely limit construction in areas where we know we're going to have big impacts. And I can send Vince the link. It's very, very informative. I don't know if maybe Matt or Fritz had heard of this, but seems like something we might want to look at to potentially be something that would be a recommendation in the plan.
Polly, is that anything that you had heard of?
Nothing that I have, no.
No, I have not either. I would just one caveat on any districts, if that's something that it would be promoted through the Coastal Resiliency Plan efforts, is to make sure that the NPDC is on board with that, because the master plan is really trying to phase out any overlay districts. But this might be a different planning mechanism tool. I just wanted to mention that.
Matt had a comment, and then back to Peter.
Yeah, no, it's similar to the Cape Cod Commission, but it's the Martha's Vineyard Commission. And we have the ability to do that, I believe, through MPDC or Planning Board. We may have to have our, planning change slightly, the documents, et cetera. And if you go on to Martha's Vineyard and look at the Martha's Vineyard Commission, you can read how the criteria on how they base their decisions on those types of issues. And they, it's something we should be considering. Planning should be considering it, because the more we can get ahead of this, the better off we'll be.
Thank you, Matt. And back to Peter.
Okay, so on the Martha's Vineyard Commission site, they describe 8 types of district: drinking water resource district, fishing resource district, farming resource district, wildlife, natural, scientific, or ecological resource district, cultural or historic resource district, economic or development resource district, major public investment district, and hazardous districts. What they're talking about is something that's not permanent. It's temporary to solve a problem. So I'm sure that the Planning Commission or whoever implements this and figure out a way to make it work. I'm just mentioning it. I don't know where we're going to take it, but it seems like it would apply to us.
Right. Thank you, Peter. Other comments as we get ready to wrap up the meeting from the members? Okay, seeing none. So our next meeting will be after the January 28th open house for the Coastal Resilience Plan and after the February 6th Civic League Managing Water Forum. So I expect that we will be doing a little bit of recap and sharing our impressions for that. And Vince, do you have the date on that? I can't see my calendar while I'm on Zoom. Second Tuesday in February. Is that the 9th, I think? Jen's confirming. And I have a request, Trevor. I don't know if this is possible, but I thought I would ask. Since Arcadis produces a monthly report of activity, is it possible that that be available to the committee prior to their first meeting of the month? February, of course, is a little bit early on the 9th, but I think in future months you'll have a few more days leeway. I think that would help to just have us feed in our reactions to that. As it stands now, that we're getting things almost a month after the fact, and so much is happening so quickly. Again, I don't know if that's possible, but I thought I would put that request out there.
Let me talk to Vince. February, the challenge is strictly administrative, that we have to, the month closes and then we have to get invoices from our subconsultants and process those. And that takes, it just takes time after the 30th of the month. So it generally does take about 2 weeks to get everything, the sort of financial and reporting of activities, but I think we can probably work something out. It may be difficult for February, just given that it's an early meeting, but moving forward, I think we can figure out a workable solution there.
Okay, and it's not a demand, it's just a thought that I had.
Understood.
Yeah. Fritz, please.
Just very quickly, just recently I received an email from the Civic League, basically advertising and soliciting responses for the forum on the 28th. And I don't know whether that's going to cause any confusion with what they're also doing on the 6th. But in other words, they have it listed as not their open house, but they're having the open house. So I'm just pointing out that I got that. So I don't know whether, like I say, it can cause any confusion. And just on the 6th, what is the time for the
1 to 3 on the 6th for the Civic League. We requested that the Civic League promote the January 28th meeting. We made that request of a number of organizations.
Okay.
And on the Civic League's website, which FYI I'm in charge of as a member of the executive committee, the Civic League is very enthusiastic about assisting in getting the public aware of our outreach opportunities for the Coastal Resilience Plan. So I'm trying to be very clear as to which event is which. For instance, I don't want to post the Coastal Resilience Plan flyer as a visual on the page for the February 6th event for the Civic League. I'd be happy to take any feedback individuals might have about how those are being promoted. But that also goes back to our conversations with Acclimate about maintaining a central event page that's a resource for the public, and trying to assist the public by clearly defining the projects that we have through Resilient Nantucket, through Remain with Acclimate, and through the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee and Coastal Resilience Plan. It is definitely a source of confusion that we're trying to help alleviate. But any suggestions that you have to improve that are welcome. Did I see a hand from somebody else? No, and if no further comments, then we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Fritz. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion is made and seconded. Holly, I'm going to ask you to read your comment out before we vote.
Yes, sorry about that. So Peter just put the Martha's Vineyard Commission's website on the chat for everybody, and I just thanked him that Vince, Chuck, and myself have had discussions previously about potential MVP projects with the Martha's Vineyard Commission. So we know that they're interested in resiliency, but I was not aware of the information that you provided. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Holly. Okay, roll call vote. I know that Gary had to leave the meeting. Sarah, for the adjournment.
Aye.
Peter? Peter, you muted?
Aye.
Thank you. Graham?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Jen?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
And Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you all. We will see you, I believe, on February 9th at the next meeting, and hopefully also on January 28th, and hopefully also on February 6th if you have the time to attend. Thank you all.
Thank you.